Hello everyone, welcome back to Alkaline Hydroxide 784. And today, you'll be looking at the history series, and this is the first episode. And this will be about, what to expect if you take history, and also like why you should take history, like if you're considering that. So let's start. The reason why I would add this as one of the episodes is because history isn't exactly the first choice for a lot of people when they go into JC and they choose their contrasting subject. So of course, for those who are taking arts, then usually they'll be taking history as one of the subjects. But this meant for those who are considering whether they should take history or whether they should just stick to econs like the majority of people. So yeah, this is just my. I'm not really trying to convince anyone to take history, but if you are deciding between history and econs or history and some other subject, maybe I can give you reasons to, help make your decision a little bit easier. Right. So, let's just go into why we should take, like why you would want to take history or another contrasting subject. As you know, there's a lot of contrasting subjects. There's econ, there's history, there's geog, there's lit. Those are like the more common ones. And there's also more unusual stuff like all the LLs, the ELL, TLL, CLL, and MLL, depending on what mother tongue you take. And also there's English. Yeah, there's English. And there's also art. I think, art. Like those China studies or something. I don't really know. Oops. But there's a lot of different, contrasting subjects. There's even like H2 foreign language. So yeah, that's really up to you to decide which one you want to take. But if let's say you're deciding between history and econs, maybe I can give you a reason why you would want to take history instead of taking econs. So yeah, the first reason would probably be interest, because if you're even thinking about history, it's because you're interested in it to some extent. Like if you didn't like history at all, you probably wouldn't have it as one of your choices, logically speaking. But that's the first reason. If you want to take history, you have to have the interest to take it, because the subject is quite challenging in its own way. Especially for science stream students, history might be a bit challenging in a special way, like rather than like, because you do your science subject you have your own strategies for doing a science paper versus a different set of strategies to do a history paper. But if you're an art student, maybe this isn't such a big deal. But for the science stream students, this if you want to do history, you have to pretty much be somewhat interested in it, or at least you had to have you hate it the least out of all of the contrasting subjects in the sense. So that's the first reason why you would want to take history over econs. Maybe because you prefer doing history compared to like econs, which is it seems more directed. It seems more money really, not really money related. Actually, I don't really know how econs the subject works. I only know how the actual econs works, if you know what I mean. And the second thing would be probably familiarity. Like some people would think that, history, they took history in O levels, they can take history in A levels. But of course, there's a little misconception that you have to clear here that is history in A levels is not the exact same as history in O levels or history in your IP schools or whatever. Because history in A levels has its own set of difficulties to overcome in order to do it. Of course, there's some similarity, like you can recognize that you still have some kind of SBQ aspect and you have an essay aspect to it, and you still get to learn about history, like the subject itself is just like you're learning about history. But the skills that you require to do the paper are more than just what you learn in O level. So you need a lot more advanced thinking to actually do the paper properly and get a good grade. But at the same time, the familiarity does help if you have done history before. First of all, it will tell you whether you actually like history. So if you've done it and you like history, even though it was a exam paper, you still liked it, then maybe you probably enjoy this even more. Who knows? Um, and another thing is that it will also give you a general idea of what doing a history exam feels like, how much writing you have to do. So that kind of familiarity does help you when you want to choose between history and econs. Because for me, I have no idea how the econ subject works. And it seems like it's a bit more directed, like if you know what to write, like if you had a topic, you already know what to write about immediately. But history is a little bit different. Even if you know all the content, there's still this sense of individuality in the way that you write your answer, or in sometimes you come up with your own new arguments which may give you more marks. Or of course there's also arguments that you've been taught, but you get the ideas. It feels a little bit more interesting than econs from the sounds of it. So yeah, that's another reason. And like a reason that probably no one really cares about, but people like me might care about, is the paper time versus the amount of stuff that you have to write. So of course in econs you probably don't have to write as much, I think, but it's not really about the amount of stuff that you write as a whole, but rather the ratio of time that you have to the amount of stuff that you have to write. When I look through all of the the different exam time versus how many marks for the thing, that kind of thing, it seemed to me like history was the most balanced, because you just have like 3 things to write in 3 hours, so you have 1 hour for each thing, and that seemed just about nice. It seemed pretty balanced actually. So I don't know, if you consider this a big thing, then maybe this is a reason why you would want to do history instead of econs. Because I mean, in Geog you have to draw diagrams and everything, and that takes even more time. And in econs you have to write a lot of smaller things rather than big things, but you have to write many of those. So, or maybe I'm saying this wrongly, so don't take my word for it. Go and look at the syllabus yourself. Yeah, so that's one other thing. And the next reason why you might take history or econs or some other contrasting subject is because maybe the skills you learn in history are what you want to actually learn. I don't know. Of course, I think for any contrasting subject, you definitely get to learn certain skills that you otherwise wouldn't get to learn if you didn't take it. But in history, I think the skills that you learn would probably help you in GP as well, especially if you know how to argue your way through, or like having a proper logical argument in the sense, especially since in history we have to argue for both. Like you have to look at SBQ arguments as well, right? Like how the paragraphs contribute to the argument or don't contribute to the argument, or how in the essay we need to so-called argue, but it's not exactly the same as GP, but it is similar. There's some similarity. And if you have a new point, you need to write it in a convincing way and give the right evidence for it as well. So that skill probably does help you in GP. But a skill that helps even more is coming up with any new new stuff, because you learn certain things, but there are some arguments that you can actually come up with on your own based on the SBQ itself. Or even for the essay, if you came up with a new way of looking at something, then that is a skill that you can use in GP as well. It's like critical thinking. So yeah, that skill is there. And also maybe the fact that you had to write something in 1 hour, so you get that skill as well, like writing things quickly and enduring it in a sense. So that skill helps you in your other papers as well. Yeah, so that's the third reason. And then the last reason is because it's history. It's fun. like history is literally it's like a professional version of learning about the stories of other people, although those other people were in the past, and yeah, now it's not the past, but still, like sometimes it's actually fun to know about the weird things that happen in history as well. And you get to realize that big countries, the leaders of big countries are just humans like us too, and sometimes they're even more childish than they act more childishly than we do. So yeah, that's what is the fun part of history. And you get to be more objective maybe because you get to hear from both sides of the story. And that's very interesting in a way. And yeah, of course, you can also get to see all the funny Cold War propaganda that you get in your SBQ. So that's very important too, right? And not only you get fun stories, you also get some content that you can use in GP as well. Like, in fact, you can use your history knowledge in GP if it is relevant to what you're writing. Maybe if it's something politics related, you can definitely use some of your history knowledge to do it. As long as it doesn't seem too distant from your argument, you can actually use it in GP. So yeah, that's pretty much why I would recommend taking history or econs or something else. Maybe, I don't know. Is there any reason why you shouldn't take history or something else? Well, if you are not interested in history at all, then you will probably suffer a lot, I think. But because it is quite challenging to do history in general, and if you're not very interested, then it will be even worse. But if you're somewhat interested but you're not that good at it, like especially at the beginning, you feel like you don't know what you're doing, don't worry too much about it. You will become better over time. So if you're interested, then go for it. Don't worry about not being good at it in a sense. Although if you really do worry about not being good at it, even after the 2 years of time, then okay, fine, it's your own choice. You can choose what you want to choose. Because the point of JC is like, because JC itself is already so tiring. So if you like when you go in, you want to choose the stuff that you definitely will enjoy the most out of the subjects. It will be better to choose something that you enjoy, even if you may not be the best at it, compared to something that you think you'll be better at but you totally hate. Because if you hate it, you're more likely to actually mess it up in the end. So yeah, in that scenario, it might be better to choose your interest or what you think is the best for you. Or if you have a variety of like a range of a range of interested to least interested or best at and worst at, then you can balance those things out and choose which subject will work for you in that sense. So that is considered and all. So what do you expect if you take history? I think that's the thing that some of you are here to listen to, even though this is not exactly the right time to listen to this, because it's in like July and people only worry about this, and actually some people might be thinking about this already, so who knows. Okay, first off, let's look at the syllabus in order to look at the different topics. So in the syllabus we have we have all these stuff here, like the introduction, the aims, and all that stuff. No one actually reads that, so let's go to the the syllabus part of it, which is from page 7 until page 12. So the thing about the history syllabus is that it's way more detailed than the science syllabus, so I guess that's pretty nice. You get quite a bit of information just looking at this one page, each of the pages actually. So each page is corresponding to a topic, and we have like paper 1 and paper 2 in H2 history, right? So in H1 history, you only have paper 1. So if you're the kind who is not very good at history, then maybe you can take H1 history. Or if you actually have the choice, then you can take it. But if you don't have a choice, then oh well. What can we say? Or if you're like very good at history, then just take H2, because you just need to do an extra 3-hour paper. That's the difference. So let's go through the 2 different papers. So paper 1 is shaping the international order, or if you want to say it in a more layman way, international history. And paper 2 is the making of independent Southeast Asia, or in layman terms, Southeast Asian history. So in paper 1 and paper 2, there are 3 topics each. So each of the pages is referring to one topic. So paper 1, the first topic is on page 7, and it is about the Cold War. So the Cold War is really just anything and everything about the Cold War. But the difference between this and what you may think you will learn is it's not just about the war part, which is of course the main thing that happens in the Cold War, like the war but not war kind of aspect of it, but also the things that happen right before the Cold War and what happens at the end of the Cold War. So uh, so it's broken up into three sections as three subtopics. So the first subtopic is kind of like what led to the Cold War starting in a sense. So to be talking about the Second World War and then talking about how two superpowers emerged, so it's like USA and USSR, and what decisions they made at that time, and how each of their decisions contributed to the other one's decision, and how that all contributed to the start of the Cold War. So that's what that part is about. And then the second part of it is the actual Cold War, in which we have the USA and the Soviet Union behaving like two very kiasu kids. Yeah, that's all I had to say. And also the very exciting Cold War propaganda that you get to see in your SBQ, and how they each of them tried to get as many people to join their team. I mean, not people, countries to join their team, and then create all sorts of little wars everywhere. Even though it's a Cold War, there are also many smaller proxy wars which were not Cold Wars, they are hot wars. So those would include the reason why Korea is not one but two Koreas, and that is the Korean War. And then the other thing that happened is the reason why Vietnam is one piece and not like broken up, which is the Vietnam War. You can see the war can have two different situations, like two different outcomes. That is quite interesting to note actually. So and of course we have the very exciting and very unusual Cuban Missile Crisis, which took place in Cuba, and it's just very weird in any way possible. So history is interesting, and you definitely will have fun learning about all of this. And yeah, that's for the main part of the Cold War. And the end of the Cold War, which is labeled as end of bipolarity, which is describing how the Cold War ended, what led to the end of the Cold War, which would be something, for example, the USSR literally just breaking down and no longer being a USSR. And also the fact that the two sides were like, what are we even doing anymore? And they didn't see the point of having a Cold War anymore, and the Cold War ended. And yeah, that's for the topic 1 in paper 1. So the second topic in paper 1 is the global economy. So if you want to learn about the economy but you don't want to do econs, then here we go. We have history for you. You get to learn the history of the economy. Sometimes it's more fun to learn the history of something rather than the actual thing. Like sometimes if I borrow like maths books, I really find the history of the maths more interesting than just learning about the maths directly. So I don't know. If you're that kind of person, then history is your subject indeed. So in topic 2, which is on page 8, there are 2 sections to it. So the first one is about the the growth of the economy, and the part where they then had a big depression kind of thing there, and that was because of stuff like the oil crisis and also just stuff that they did when they were having growth, which eventually contributed to stuff that, like the fact that they had a depression eventually. So just all that factors that you can get to learn about. And the other subtopic here is the Asian tiger economies. Technically you could include Singapore in this, but we are not going to talk about it in international history. So instead we look at South Korea and Taiwan. Like that's what the syllabus chose as the 2 examples. And when other countries were having the depression, these 2 countries ended up having a lot of growth, even though South Korea especially started from quite a impoverished state, and it eventually became something that was really influential today, as you can tell. and there are certain reasons for that as well. So you get to learn what all the different factors that contribute to the growth or the depression of the economy in the sense. And yeah, it's not as simple as you think. It's actually a lot of factors that contribute to this. So the third topic in paper 1, which is on page 9, it is about the UN. Even though it literally is written as International Peace and Security, this is literally just about the UN. So this is what this topic is, the UN. And in this one, there are 3 subtopics. The first one is how the UN was formed. Although that one isn't really that big of a topic, it's just like usually they won't really talk about it as much in the exam either. So yeah, that's one part of it. So why the UN was formed, what are the principles that it follows, that very boring UN document that you probably had to read, and all that stuff. Yeah. And then the second part is the about how the UN does its things, and this is where you realize that the UN is not as useful as you think it is. It is actually something that you can easily tease. Indeed, history is about teasing things that are much bigger than you. Yeah, don't expect me to say anything about that. Okay. So this will be about how effective the UN was at maintaining peace and security. So like basically different countries will have different conflicts, and also big groups of countries may have conflicts with each other. So that's one aspect, and the other aspect is individual countries having conflicts with each other. So when they have conflicts, for example, even Singapore and Malaysia, the Pedra Branca thing, they went and talked about it in the ICJ in 2008. Likewise, many countries went and talked about their conflicts in the International Court of Justice, which is what the ICJ is. And yeah, you get to see how effective or ineffective that was in the sense, and why it was effective or ineffective. And you also get to learn about why the US is not so great after all. As if the Cold War wasn't enough to tell you that, but still. Yeah, you get to tease the US as well. You can get to tease the UN, you get to tease the US, you get to tease literally everyone. That's why history is fun. Okay. So the third part of this topic is actually UN reforms. Even though it is not tested in 2020 exams, I think I prefer this to the ICJ. So because the ICJ, you need to remember all of the case studies. So in the UN topic, there's a lot of case studies for all of the conflicts, and you would probably need to tell some of them, like cite them as examples. And yeah, so that's one place where you might have some trouble memorizing stuff. But right, but the reforms are a bit easier just because it's a bit more directed. It's easier to keep, like once you know what are the arguments, it's a lot easier to talk about. So it's a bit sad that it's not there in the this year's exam. Anyways, that's for paper 1. So now let's move on to paper 2, and the first topic is on page 10, and this is the political stability. So basically it is about how the countries are able to maintain political stability or domestic stability, as they say. And this has 2 parts. The first one is about the governance, and the second one is about national unity. So the governance is referring to stuff like whether they were democratic or authoritarian, or whether they stayed democratic or whether they stayed authoritarian for a long period of time. So in fact, Southeast Asia isn't as simple as you think it is. It is actually quite complex in a sense. Singapore and Malaysia were the ones with the so-called the semi-democracy, that kind of thing, and they were like that for a very long time, so they didn't really have any issues with that. And so the other countries tried to be democratic and eventually ended up in an authoritarian government of some sort, and that actually proved to be more stable for them than the democracy itself. And once that fell down, then it was really hard to re-establish democracy properly without having a lot of weak governments and a lot of problems in the sense. So that's what you get to learn about. Yeah, you can also see how the Cold War actually influenced their decisions in a way. So in the sense of the Cold War, it's not going to be fun if you're a communist country, unless you're Vietnam, I guess. And most of them will try to be democratic, if I would say with two apostrophe marks, because they don't want to be seen as a enemy by the USA. So yeah. So the next part is the second subtopic is approaches to national unity within political stability. So what is national unity? National unity is about how the country can stay together, like how whether they're able to prevent minorities or certain groups of people from seceding from the country or creating another autonomous country. I guess you understand what I'm talking about, right? So this will be how they treat the minorities to begin with, because if they treat them well, then the minorities wouldn't want to leave the country, of course. Or you can look at the part where the minorities actually do want to leave the country and they try to rebel or they try to oppose, being a part of the country, and we see whether that is effective or whether the country is able to somehow put that down, whether they do it in an amicable way or a violent way, how they do it, and what that leads to, what's the consequence of all of their actions. So that's what the national unity part is about. So that's for the topic 1. Paper 2, topic 2 is economic development, which is on page 11. Basically, economic development, it's kind of a bit like global economy, but in this case, you're not looking at the overall economy, but instead the economies of individual countries. So it's a bit like you can actually, if you want to have a little fun exercise, you can compare how the Southeast Asian countries did their things as compared to South Korea and Taiwan, right? So they have different ways of doing their things, and that led to different economic outcomes as well. So this is the reason why they probably didn't put Singapore with South Korea and Taiwan, is because you need to mention it here in paper 2. So this topic has 2 subcategories, which is paths to economic development and Asian financial crisis. So the paths to economic development is their general way of trying to develop themselves, because some of them will try to focus on one industry, like their primary resource, since they have a lot of resources, and some of them will try to move on to more like secondary resources, or to move on to secondary industries in a sense, and try to get money in a different way. And that is one aspect of it. Another aspect is how they manage the money that they actually get from doing all of this. That's one aspect as well. So these 2 aspects kind of determine how their country grows. And there's also a small point on the ethnic communities in their role in developing the economy, because some of them will end up earning more than others sometimes, and that leads to certain consequences, and that leads to certain strategies to combat those consequences. And this would be most evident in Malaysia, because Malaysia actually tried to help the Malay population in a sense, because they weren't like they gave them like financial bonuses and stuff like that. So you get to learn about how this is relevant to economic development here. So that's economic development. Yeah, the other part of it is actually Asian financial crisis, and that is probably the most recent thing out of all of the things that you see here in this whole subject, because this is the thing that happened in 1998, and your history syllabus, it covers from 1945 until 2000. So this is like the closest thing to your own time, I guess. So in the Asian financial crisis, some of the effects of it could still be felt today, who knows, or could have motivated certain policies in later recessions, like the 2008 recession or 2011. So it is quite significant actually. But in this one, you probably will be most likely trying to have to remember a bunch of numbers and stuff, especially even like the entire topic itself, you probably have to remember a whole bunch of numbers. So just a warning on that. So you get to learn about which countries were affected more or less, or by the crisis and why that was the case, or why the crisis even happened to begin with, and also how the countries reacted to it, and whether they managed to recover from the crisis quickly based on their responses and everything. So the last topic, which is paper 2 topic 3 on page 12, it is regional conflicts and cooperation. So this has 2 topics, which is interstate tensions and cooperation, which is about individual countries and their small little skirmishes that they have, or actually big skirmishes like confrontasi. Like the smaller skirmishes would be more of like normal border skirmishes, so like they just like maybe something to do with the minority, and like someone goes somewhere and then it causes a little problem, but then they resolve it pretty quickly, so it's not that big of a issue usually. But the bigger ones, yeah, there's definitely bigger ones, and I won't talk more about that because that may not be a good idea, but you get to learn about it in history, so just learn about it there. So the second subtopic in this one is ASEAN, and that's actually the majority of this topic because it's pretty much mostly just ASEAN history here. So you get to learn about why ASEAN was formed, and there's actually other organizations formed before ASEAN, and you can learn about why those things failed and instead ASEAN was the thing that was formed. And you can also get to learn about why, like what ASEAN's real purpose was. Like they may say, oh, we were formed to have economic development and stuff, but in reality they formed so that they could keep themselves secure in a situation where the international superpowers were kind of not ignoring Southeast Asia for the most part. So they didn't want to end up being unprotected. They wanted to protect each other instead, which is pretty nice actually. So their real reason was to keep themselves safe, although they didn't say that because they didn't want to anger any of the superpowers. If you know that would be a terrible idea. So they were like, ASEAN is pretty smart in that sense. But in reality, ASEAN as in its own function, maybe it might have helped with some of the conflicts, but its real power is limited in many ways. So yeah, you get to learn about that as well. So that's the topics actually. So the next part about what you expect is the lessons, and then we'll move on to the exam. So in terms of history lessons, what you get is lectures and tutorials. I know it depends on the school as well, which JC, like each JC has their own way of doing their lectures and their tutorials and everything. So in general, what I think happens is in lectures, you would be going through the content first. Like you go through all the content and you will be going through some arguments in general, but you probably won't have that in your mind because it's a lecture, so you'll probably be sleeping half the time. And like the more important thing is to actually just see whether you remember all of your content. But if your history teacher is very interesting, then you probably won't be sleeping, so yeah, don't worry about that. So if your history teacher is actually quite eloquent and then they say a lot of nice interesting things that you think will help you to understand the topic better, then you should write it down because maybe you can use it for your arguments or when you write your essays and stuff. And in your lessons, what you get to do is your like actual question and answer kind of thing. So you get to learn the skills for your SBQ and your essays, and you also get to learn what are the different arguments you should form based on the content that you have in your note, because honestly your notes are probably not going to help you to immediately become good at history because you may not really understand what's going on. So the tutorial is there to help you understand your notes even better, like understand how to use your notes and apply it to the questions. And tutorial is definitely the place where you should definitely put a lot of focus and attention, because if you take notes well, you can actually convert that into your own notes for studying in the exam. So like yeah, you can take whatever you wrote down in tutorial and then clean it up, make it nice, and just separate out all the arguments and then use it in a general sense rather than for the specific question. You can use it for whatever question that actually works for in the sense. And I'll be talking more about that in the strategy series, so don't worry. So that's how lessons goes. And how successful you are at history depends on you and your teacher as well. So yeah, good luck. But yeah, I guess I was lucky to have good teachers, I guess. And I actually did enjoy the lectures and some of the lessons as well. So history can be fun if you take it with a positive mindset and if you get good teachers. Great. Okay, so now let's go to the exam format. And the exam format, you will look at the syllabus once again because you can see the syllabus as well, so why not? So in the syllabus page 4, we have the scheme of assessment, and on page 5 they actually describe the two different parts of the components, the source base and the essay questions. So you can read the page 5 on your own. I'll just go through the general format of the exam. So in each paper you have 3 hours. You have 3 hours of time to write. And in that 3 hours you have to write 1 SBQ and 2 essays. Yeah, that's the general idea. So it's about 1 hour for each thing. Or if you are actually sensible enough, you'll probably give 50 minutes for SBQ and 1 hour 5 minutes for the essays. I don't know. It sounds weird, but that makes more sense actually. So anyways, in the SBQ, what you do is you have 6 sources, and the 6 sources will be either for or against, or maybe not very relevant at all to a specific argument that they'll be asking about. So when you see that argument, you're supposed to, in theory, first of all compare. Maybe usually it's source A and source B, but they could actually change it up and say E and F or something. But let's just say source A and source B. You had to compare the two of them in according to what the question asks for, in the sense that, so if they specify something, then you should take that into consideration when you're comparing them. And after you compare the two of them, you then go to the actual main part of it, which is seeing which sources support the argument, which sources don't, and then arguing which sources argue for it and which sources don't. So yeah, it sounds confusing, but you get the idea. Like you're supposed to point out which sources do what and give your reasons why for that, and also give your reason on how good their assertions are, or how good the arguments in the sources are, or maybe how relevant they are. I don't know, it depends on the source. As I said, more will be given to you in the strategy series, like strategy episodes, I mean. Yeah, so that's the general exam format. So the SBQ is the first topic in paper 1, which is a Cold War. So your Cold War will be completely SBQ. It will not be tested in your essay. So like your paper 1, you have Cold War as SBQ. You have 1 essay question for global economy and 1 essay question for UN. Of course, by 1 question, it means you actually get to choose from 2 different questions. So choosing the right question is also pretty important to know. So depends on which one you studied better, and also your own skills at answering certain questions, which will probably be covered in the strategies. I hope I remember that. And for paper 2, the one that's in SBQ is actually the one that features ASEAN. So the ASEAN one will be in SBQ. So at this junction, what I can say is, if you remember your South China Seas very well, that could actually help you in this segment if your SBQ is on the South China Seas. Even though the stuff that you know may not be within this time period, it may help you to give some credit to your arguments or whatever you're writing. It gives you an even deeper understanding of the subject, which may help. It will help. Okay. And for the essay questions, you have 1 on the political stability and 1 on economic development. So yeah, so that is your 2 papers, and each of this is 3 hours, and you'll be probably like having hand cramps by the end of each of them. So have fun. But like as I said earlier, it may be actually good because you have 1 hour for each thing, which is a nice, reasonable amount of time to do that. Even though for your GP you get 1.5 hours, which is quite a lot of time actually. So I don't know. In history, 1 hour for each thing is a decent amount of time. You can have enough time to write down everything you need to write down. So that's for the scheme of assessment, and that's how your exam paper works. Yeah, so that's it. I hope you've got to learn more about what the subject entails, and maybe that will help you decide whether you want to take H2 history or not. And yeah, if you found this episode useful, please press the like button and subscribe. And do look forward to next week's episode on strategies before the paper, so like during your lessons and stuff. And with that, I would like to say thank you and bye.